first game of the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Nepomniachtchi begins in Dubai on the 26th of November. That's game one. And in the run-up to the match, of course, I'm going to be looking back at some of their past encounters so as to try and divine what might actually occur in the match itself. They know each other extremely well. They've played, according to my database, 77 times. I don't claim that to be a definitive database. They could well have played more than that. But anyway, they know each other extremely well. And, you know, that makes it interesting. And looking at their past encounters, well, you know, they've both landed blows on each other. You know, it's been pretty even in that respect. But the play itself has not been even. You know, I think Nepo is quite a different player to, let's say, Caruana. If you think back to the World Championship match in 2018, Caruana, a very stable player. And I think Nepo is a very different character. You know, he often plays quite quickly. He plays sometimes with real inspiration. You know, sometimes some really interesting ideas. More on that later. What I want to do is show you the very first game that they played against each other. And this was played in the European Under-12 Championship in 2002. You know, their rivalry and friendship, I should say, goes right back to, you know, when they were very, very young. They were both born in 1990. Nepo is slightly older. He was born in July 1990, Carlsen in November. So let's go back and look at that game. So Nepo had the white pieces, and this was played in round 5 of the European Under-12 Championship. So an Alekin's defence from Carlsen. Well, that's not really part of his repertoire these days. However, I do remember not so long ago, Carlsen scored a splendid victory against Caruana, actually, in a 4-pawns attack. He was playing on the black side of this. But we have, I would say, the sort of regular main line with knight f3. Carlsen exchanges on e5. A little bit of a sideline. Larsen used to like to play like this. It's in some ways quite a solid alternative for black. It just results in, well, I would describe it as a Caro-Kann pawn structure for black. You can see that clearly here with the pawn on c6. White is slightly better. White has a slight space advantage. Now, the most normal move here is just to castle and bring the rook to e1, support the knight on e5. But knight c3 from Nepo, and this shows, I think, that he was a slightly tricky player. Of course, knight takes knight, bishop takes pawn, it's mate. Bishop e6, castles. If knight c3, then bishop e6 is a nice move. So knight takes queen, bishop takes pawn. And obviously white has a huge advantage after this. I mean, you can just recapture it. Actually, queen f3 is an interesting move as well. But no, probably pawn takes knight is the most sensible. So anyway, knight d7. And here, you know, I think a Carlsen, or at least a latter-day Carlsen, would probably exchange here and achieve this structure. Carlsen loves playing with this pawn structure as white. And I think white is just slightly better here. But queen f3 from Nepo, and again a nice little trick. Knight c3, queen takes pawn, and mate. Bishop g7, rook e1. In fact, black should be absolutely fine in this position. And here, okay, there's a lot of traffic in the middle of the board, but Carlsen does exactly the right thing. And that is exchange off here. and then knight takes c3, and this results in a very comfortable position for black. If bishop takes bishop, okay, a useful little tactic. Black has knight e2 check, winning the queen. Obviously, if rook takes, then queen check and mate next move. So that means queen takes is forced. Bishop takes. So those exchanges have certainly benefited black here. Queen reaches into the middle of the board, and this endgame would be better for black. With simple pressure on the c-file and minority attack, that's actually rather uncomfortable for white. So instead of that, Nepo just ducked the queen back with queen e2, supporting the pawn. And Carlsen claims the open file to some extent. Bishop g5. Queen e6. It's actually a little bit difficult for white to challenge on the open file because of the pawn on a2, but also the weakness of the pawn on e5. So Nepo has to be careful. Queen e3, b6, a4, and rook d5. And this looks like a kind of typical Carlsen game. You know, he's starting to gain control in the middle of the board, and it looks pretty smooth. So the pawn attacked, bishop here, queen f5, attacking the pawn, queen e4. It's possible to go into the endgame, but Carlsen keeps the queens on and maintains control over the d-file. c3, rook d8, there you go. You can see Carlsen just has control here. So here's a moment where Nepo could have tried to simplify the game, and I think this is an interesting moment actually. He plays h3. He could have considered e6 here, which results in an endgame. And now here's a key move, g5, and that puts the question to the bishop. It obviously it can't go back to e3, the square it would like to go to, because then that's mate next move. So the bishop has to go here, which means that black has access to this square. Now there is no doubt that black is a bit better in this position, with potential entry here. But can black make anything of this position? I'm not sure. You know, that rook could well be expelled. I mean, black can try various things here. I think what the point I'm trying to make is that Nepo did have the option to go for a slightly worse endgame and try to hang on there. But I think typically for him, he doesn't want to suffer. You know, he would prefer to keep the tension in the position, keep more pieces on the board. And he finds some counterplay of his own, because here he plays a5. So that's a bit annoying for black. Carlsen doesn't want the file to be opened, so he closes, but now a6. And that pawn just presents a little bit of a target. I mean, difficult to attack it immediately. But later on, if the position opens up, you know, that bishop might just duck back, whoops, to hit the pawn on a7. That's one possibility. So it's interesting the way that Nepo has just managed to create a little bit of complication in the position. So Carlsen obviously is still better. His pieces look good, obviously the major pieces. But this is starting to get a little bit tricky because of those pawns. And typically, you know, Carlsen wants to simplify the position. He wants to maintain control on the d-file. He wants clarity. So he gets an endgame, but rook a5, there's a little bit of pressure. King f1, e6. Still looks to me like black is better. But now bishop e3. Things start to turn. The bishop hits the pawn on a7 here, and now bishop d4. Now things have really turned around actually. You know, if we go back a few moves, so Carlsen's desire to clarify the position. Actually, you know, it looks nice for black here, but actually Nepo has turned it. Rook d5 is actually a better try for the advantage, but that's more complicated because it maintains the queen in a strong position. So queen d5 looks nice, but actually after this it's quite clear that Nepo is doing fine with that bishop locked in on d4 and making sure that those rooks don't have access to the d file. And here, well, my computer still thinks that black is all right here. Thinks the position is about level, but okay, I think Carlsen has to be a little bit careful. Carlsen played bishop f8, rook b1, and Nepo finds a nice idea, just cracking open the b file. And now it's very, very difficult for Carlsen. You can see that you know, these pawns are targets now. You know, if Nepo can exchange and get the rook to b7, there could be trouble. Bishop d8 hits the rook. Rook back. So yeah, for example, if pawn takes here, look at those pawns. They are targets. You know, the rook about to come to b2. So Carlsen decides to ditch the exchange in the hope of closing things. Obviously, if he can play b4 to protect the c pawn, then you know that is certainly gives black some chances to hold. But b4, of course, shuts that. Rook d1 protects the pawn. Rook here. Bishop e7. And now Nepo doesn't hang around, he just opens up the position. If pawn takes pawn, then rook takes here. So bishop takes pawn, but now d6, rook goes back, and rook b1. And here Carlsen resigned. Let's just have a quick look. If bishop a5, rook takes b5, well, here, rook b7, I mean, you can see this is absolutely hopeless for black. If bishop b6, that can be taken, and this is a winning position for white here, and rook c8. So that was the final position, rook b1. So that victory was an important step on the way to Nepo actually winning the tournament. So Nepo came first. Carlsen was actually 6th in this European Under-12 Championship. And in fact, later on in the year, they both played in the World Under-12 Championship. And they tied for first, but Nepo won on tiebreak. So you can see their rivalry just goes way back. And it will continue in Dubai in November. There's going to be lots more from these players coming up soon. But I have to say, you know, just looking back through their games already, I find it really fascinating how they've played each other in the past, and gives us a little clue, a few clues as to how things might be for the match. So look out for those. See you soon.